My name is Paul, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Ranjit, Solutions Engineer from HashiCorp, and Ryan, Principal Product Manager for TLS Protect Cloud. Over the next couple of minutes, we'll first get a quick primer of infrastructure as code in general before moving into a discussion about how machine identities can be included as part of that infrastructure in a secure, repeatable way that gives individuals and teams greater flexibility while providing better security for the organization as a whole. In addition to being secure and repeatable, it's also super easy to incorporate using just one or two lines of code. What is infrastructure as code? How do individuals and teams that are using infrastructure as code tools like Terraform benefit from that? And maybe how does infrastructure as code help enable collaboration between those two teams? Ranjit, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So with the kind of dynamic infrastructure that we're working with today, multi-platform, multi-cloud, hybrid between on-prem and in the cloud. So with the different types of things we're working with today, infrastructure as code is the process of now. Let's manage that stuff both on-prem and in the cloud with rather than scripts that are kind of imperative execution into more machine readable definition files where let me describe the outcome of what I want, and then based on the platform or the runtime, have the tool figure out how to deploy and make that happen. So you can kind of think of it as almost executable documentation. So it's human readable, very friendly. You should be able to see what's going on as far as the definition goes, but all the scripting and the API calls that are, again, compiled by the tool will happen on the back end. And so what this allows us to do is we'll have more of a codified process to create infrastructure. So we can employ things like version control, merge requests, peer review, and all the things that version control pipelines give us for both creating and evolving our infrastructure. We can safely try things out by using dry runs with things like Terraform Plan to see what we're about to do before we actually do it. We can add in all the benefits of CI/CD and DevOps tooling in general, as far as code checking or infrastructure costing and things like that. And as we get more into repeatable patterns, we can start to create modules that are reusable and start composing based on reusable modules so that folks aren't defining everything from scratch. There's probably something out there that's already been done that we can plug a few inputs into and customize it for us. But other than that, it's kind of already been done, and it's something that we can definitely use from project to project to project. Uh, and then as we scale this, we want to make sure that we're not just sort of opening the vast power of infrastructure as code to everyone. We still want to put some guardrails around this, some security, make sure people are operating sort of in bounds with what they should be doing. So policy as code, organizational standards are things that we want to keep an eye on as we employ this new infrastructure as code workflow without kind of stifling the collaboration between different users and different teams.
I think I'm starting to understand a little bit about how infrastructure as code tools might help me and my organization. Ryan, I think you've got a pretty good analogy. You got anything to add?
And I like to think of infrastructure as code as kind of being analogous to the blueprints for a house. Everyone knows what a house is supposed to look like, so you could just start building one. But the blueprint provides you with a plan that makes sure everything fits together. Um, but infrastructure as code is better than blueprints, really, because the instructions are consumed by computers, right? Machines. So the results are precise and repeatable, and really no opportunity for, or minimal opportunity for mistakes or flawed materials to deal with there.
So, if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'm just going to try and repeat back and summarize some of the stuff that I just heard. So, basically, infrastructure as code means that we can now have codified workflow for application deployments, leading to some of the other immediate benefits that we see on the slide here. We can incorporate change control for application infrastructure, and that enables all the same features likely already being utilized by source control for application code itself, like versioning, that reusability that you talked about, Ranjit, and team collaboration. Third, chances are there are many pieces of that codified infrastructure that are reusable. either for the same application as deployed in different environments, or even different applications that utilize the same resources and security policies. By ensuring that dev and test environments are enabled to use the same processes and tools as production, teams are able to perform safe, realistic testing and catch errors and misconfigurations as early as possible, even before they become costly outages. Because this process has been thoroughly documented and tested in these lower environments, teams are able to be certain that enterprise security policy is going to be enforced consistently. There's not going to be any surprises when moving from dev to prod, for example. And then if you guys have happened to catch any of my earlier sessions this week, you may have heard this term that I like to refer to as guided self-service, which I think explains the concept pretty well. Allowing these teams to do their jobs on their own schedule without the need to wait for change control windows or cumbersome approval steps enables effortless collaboration and generally makes teams happier. So if you guys are okay with that summary, I'm going to go ahead and move on then to how we start thinking about incorporating machine identity into that infrastructure as code. We've got a pretty good baseline about what infrastructure as code is. And so why do we want to involve machine identities into that infrastructure?
I mean, infrastructure as code can be limited to just the infrastructure, but it doesn't have to be. Like going back to my analogy, if it was house blueprints that included the furnishings, the furniture, and decor, that's kind of analogous to installing and configuring the application workloads on the machine, right? And as part of that, I think including machine identities in the infrastructure as code definitions makes a ton of sense because most workloads need certificates to function. So if you're deploying machines and their workloads together, the workload, you really want the workload to be operational when the deployment's finished, which means including those, incorporating those certificates into the infrastructure as code definition.
I'm gonna recap maybe one more time here. Incorporating machine identities into infrastructure as code is really the next logical step. Like you said, these workloads need certificates anyway, so why not simplify things for everybody and just kind of include them from the beginning when defining your resources? It makes, again, security teams happy because risk is eliminated. And I think that alone is reason enough, but it also makes application teams happier because they now don't have to wait for any of those approval processes. They get exactly what they need when they need it. And finally, it enables this complete kind of end-to-end automation. There's no change control processes or approval steps introduced when you've tested your plan and you know it works. And the security team is still able to get that visibility, provide policy and governance. And so really it helps the organization as a whole. Ranjit, anything that you want to add there in terms of Terraform?
Yeah, so the way that we're coming at it is so if we think about traditional provisioning, a lot of stuff is IP or host name based. And the style of stuff that we're doing now is we can't really rely upon these kind of older constructs for machine identity. So it definitely makes sense to issue certificates that will be the thing that is presented as the machine's identity. But of course, we want to make sure that we can automate this so that we're not using 5-year or 10-year certificates just to make life easier. So to create a pattern of short-lived certificates to make sure that we're using keys in a very short-lived way. We don't want to, again, hinder development and workflows. So kind of bringing automation to this is where Terraform Cloud comes in, is let's be able to mint machine identity through certificates and make it easy. It's a blocker for everything else that folks are doing. And so we can iterate and test and make sure it's very usable before we kind of put this workflow on top of production or anything like that.
So let's talk best practices. I think you both have maybe alluded to one or two of these already, especially when talking about minimizing the lifetime of these keys. Can you maybe explain a bit more about that and maybe share a few more important things to consider as teams begin to implement machine identities in their infrastructure as code plans?
Yeah, we always kind of hear some stories about how, whoops, this certificate expired And in fact, the errors that or symptoms of that are things that don't necessarily point to an expired certificate, and it kind of takes a while to dig into a problem and reveal that ultimately the root cause was an expired certificate. So it's kind of a mechanism. It's pretty easy to create a certificate and deploy it onto a file system, but it's not something we do often enough that we develop a muscle memory for it. So it's kind of just something that we have to remember how to do every so often. So if we can automate that to the point where it becomes sort of nominal to just issue a certificate through automation, that's something where now we can cut certificate TTL times down to a point where like we can just turn them out. It's something we can do easily. It's repeatable. It's reliable, and that's a good best practice.
Coupling the certificate acquisition process as part of the application deployment process, like every time there's a code update for the application, you basically just reinvoke this repeatable process, right? And it allows you to get your certificate lifetimes down to validities down to days or even hours potentially, if you are that aggressive. But all of that is hugely beneficial to security because the longer a key's in use, the more risk there is of it being compromised, whether physically or cryptographically, right? So all of this serves to make the organization operations much more secure and stable, and basically eliminate outage risk and improve security posture.
Really, what we're talking about here is short-lived certificates, non-reusable private keys. These types of things means that no team has to worry anymore about the renewal process or revocation, as you mentioned, because they're expiring in minutes or hours. You get strict yet flexible policy design from information security teams that provides that self-service to the application teams while also maintaining their visibility. It's important, again, to provide machine identities to all environments, including development and test. This allows teams enough time to perfect the process, continuously redeploying and improving their application's infrastructure, while ensuring that there's not going to be any critical outages when it comes time to deploy into production. And finally, just test, test, test. I can't stress that enough. Good automation doesn't work without thorough testing. And so when you put all of this together, the team has more secure application since security has shifted left a bit and is being planned for and built in during the architecture design phase. The security team is happier because risk has been eliminated, and both teams are enabled to do their jobs the way they'd like to. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm always happier when I can use the tools and apps that I'm familiar with. And so there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this short session into machine identity as code. Big thanks to Ranjit and Ryan for talking with me today. Thanks.
Still have questions? Turn to Venafi, the machine identity experts. Check out our channel or visit venafi.com to learn about all things encryption, certificate management, and more.